Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have talked a ton about this USC program over the last couple of weeks, but a lot of those conversations have been surrounded by the recruiting trail, the transfer portal. I want to dive back into this USC team heading into 2024 and talk about some names that have been really starting to stand out during spring practice. Talk about what that means for this USC team heading into 2024, and then also preview the conversation that we're going to have a lot over the next couple of weeks in terms of positions that we're going to see USC go to the transfer portal and add heading into 2024. Extremely excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the USC fans. Y'all know I have a blast talking this program, whether it's the recruiting trail, whether it's the transfer portal. The amount of support you guys have shown the boys truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with the quarterback position, where you haven't heard a ton of quote unquote intel coming out of spring practice, but what I've seen in the press conferences, from what I've read, you're seeing everything that you want to see from Miller Moss as being the guy heading into 2024. He seems like he has command of this locker room, command of this offense, and kind of the respect from not only the coaching staff, but the players as well. And that's something that doesn't always get talked about in terms of evaluating the quarterback position. But I think it's something that is extremely important, that your quarterback is one of the leaders of this team. And it really does seem like Miller Moss is one of the more well-respected players in this USC locker room. I think that's massive for this USC offense heading into 2024. Another thing that I want to touch on that I kind of found interesting from Lincoln Riley is USC maybe looking to add a wide receiver in the transfer portal. And I think at first, a lot of people would scratch your head. I think this USC wide receiver room is going to be one of the best in the country. But I think Lincoln Riley is looking at this wide receiver room and say, all right, Deuce Robinson only going into his second year, Mekhi Lennon, Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, all guys that are only going into year two of their college football careers. And although that is one of the most talented wide receiver rooms in the country, Lincoln Riley probably wants to add a little bit more depth to that wide receiver room, but more importantly, probably some experience as well. This is a very young wide receiver room heading into the Big Ten. You might want to go add another wide receiver who has kind of some of that proven production heading into 2024. Now, the conversation that might get a little difficult is it's going to be hard to sell wide receiver to come play for USC, not because the offense isn't going to be good. You want to play wide receiver for USC if you are a guy in the transfer portal. I think the conversation has to go around. I mean, you have 4 wide receivers that are NFL guys that are only going into their second year. It is going to be tough sledding for a wide receiver to come in through the transfer portal and be a guy that is going to be a producer for this USC wide receiver room because of how loaded it is. I think that conversation is going to have to deal with, all right, what kind of wide receiver are we looking for? What wide receivers emerge in the transfer portal? Any way you cut it, it sounds like these wide receivers, they're going to be very good in 2024. Now, you look on the offensive line, a couple of things that I want to touch on. One, you're getting a lot of really, really good reports from Tobias Raymond. I think that's really encouraging for USC fans. Jason Zandamela hits the transfer portal. My quick take on that is Jason Zandamela has an extremely bright future, whether it was with USC, whether it's with another program, but he was not going to be a guy. Lincoln Riley even said it himself. Jason Zandamela was not going to be a contributor for this USC team in 2024. We kind of knew that with him coming in from the high school ranks as a really raw, athletic guy that hadn't really played a ton of football, was a rugby player growing up. He needed some more seasoning. So although it does hurt to lose a player of the caliber and potential of Jason Zandamela, as far as it concerns this 2024 USC team, I don't think you're too concerned. Now, if you're a USC fan looking at this offensive line, I think you feel really good about 4 players on this offensive line. The feedback for Elijah Page continues to be very, very good at left tackle. He is going to be a stalwart for USC for at least the next 2 years. Emmanuel Pregnon, Jonah at center. I really feel good about Alani Noah at the right guard spot as well. I think the big conversation here is One, you got to add some depth. You go into the Big Ten, you want 7, 8 offensive linemen that you trust playing football at the Big Ten level. I think USC has 4 right now, and that number could potentially grow as you come out of fall camp and spring practice. I'm looking at that right tackle spot, and I'm looking at USC to get very aggressive in the transfer portal if a tackle does become available. There are a few that I'm really interested in. Andrew Chambly from Arkansas, I think, would be a really nice addition for USC. We'll have a better sense of how to have this conversation when we start to see offensive tackles hit the transfer portal. Lincoln Riley said it. I think I completely agree. Not only adding a potential right tackle starter, but more importantly, you want to sprinkle in some more depth. You want to have more offensive linemen on this USC roster that you feel comfortable playing in 2024. Because right now, again, from what you saw from Mason Murphy, I don't think you're saying that about him. I think 4 offensive linemen you feel good about. I think USC's goal is whether that's progression from the guys that are already on this roster or is adding guys in the transfer portal. You want to get that number probably up to 7 or 8 offensive linemen heading into 2024. Running back position, feel pretty good about. Want to move over to the defense, where that's where I really want to hammer home and talk about some of the things that we're looking for this team out of spring practice. One, getting Bear Alexander back. We already talked about it. Massive. What I'm really excited about, and I think Sean Nua kind of talked about this in his press conference, and it's a really good point. You look at this USC team, there are so many names that you expect to take that step heading into 2024, right? Bear Alexander, as much as he is a household name at the college football level, you saw, fan bases from every single country or every single state across the country kind of know who Bear Alexander was when the rumor started that he's hitting the transfer portal. I say all that to say he's only going into year 3 of his college football career. We still expect a massive jump from the production of Bear Alexander. You look at a guy like Anthony Lucas, only going into year 3. Elijah Hughes, only going into year 2. Braylon Shelby, only going into year 2. There are a lot. Sam Green, another guy that I expect to break out for USC. There are a lot of defensive linemen on this team that Sean Nua kind of mentioned. They had all the physical talent during their freshman year, but really weren't necessarily the polished players that were ready to play on a football field in 2023. I think a lot of those names going into year 2 or year 3, they're going to be ready in 2024. Now, I say that and say I still do expect USC to add a few bodies on the defensive line. Similar conversation that we had with the offensive line going into the Big Ten, a line of scrimmage conference. You don't only want to have a really good starting offense or defensive line. You want to have a lot of guys in the 2 and 3 deep that you trust to play big time football. And so if you're USC, I think depth on the offense and defensive line is going to be a massive priority for this USC program. But I really do like not only the youth, but the versatility that they do have on this defensive line. You look at the linebacker spot, Anthony Beavers kicking down a linebacker. I think that is one of the examples of what we talked about with Dan Lynn and saying, hey, Dan Lynn is a very good schematic coach, but I think what truly makes him a phenomenal defensive coordinator is how he can use his talent in identifying guys that can do certain things and then putting them in spots where they can be successful. It's something that you just never saw Alex Grinch. In fact, he just did a horrible job at it, right? You saw so many guys playing roles and being asked to do things that they just weren't, they didn't really fit, right? You were asking personnel guys there, you were asking the personnel on your team to do things that they weren't necessarily great at doing. Dan Lynn, that's going to be a 180, right? And so a guy like Anthony Beavers, I think that's an example of, hey, we look at Anthony Beavers and say, that's a big physical safety that we think has the physical ability to play more in the box and help us out from an athletic standpoint, maybe a little bit more in the tackle box. So I'm excited to see how that transition plays out. You look at the secondary, and I've been extremely vocal. I expect maybe USC to lose 1 or 2 players into the transfer portal. I look at the secondary, John Humphrey, DeCarlos Nicholson, Jacoby Covington in that cornerback room and say, I feel great about that. Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey, I've been extremely vocal that I think those guys are very good football players at the safety spot. I think this USC secondary is in a great spot. I expect USC maybe to lose 1 or 2 guys just because of how loaded that secondary room is. Outside of that, I think USC is in a good spot. I think if you continue to make sure that this team is going to hold up on the line of scrimmage, this team going into the Big Ten can give a lot of teams. I'm a Michigan fan, but give a lot of Big Ten teams some trouble with the raw athleticism and speed that they have on the boundary. And if you can hold up on the line of scrimmage, this is going to be a dangerous team in 2024. We'll continue to talk about spring practice. We'll obviously talk a lot about what USC is going to do in the transfer portal. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. All the support from the USC fans has been absolutely phenomenal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.